Look, no speaker wants to follow the Bang & Olufsen Beolab 90s. That's a lot of pressure to live up to, and several of you have even asked us, how do you go back? And honestly, I gotta tell you, it's been a work in progress. I'm not sure there has ever been a speaker besides the 90 that's made it so hard for me to, quote, go back to what most of you would consider a traditional hi-fi speaker like the one we're talking about today, the Radiant Acoustics Clarity 6.2. For me, this really has been a tale of two different experiences. Before the 90s arrived, we had just begun to evaluate the Radiant speaker. And for those of you unfamiliar with the brand, Radiant Acoustics is hi-fi legend Peter LYNGDORF's latest audio venture, and as of this review, the Clarity is the only product they make. When the Radiant arrived, I was initially very impressed with this two-way speaker. I gotta tell you, it is incredibly well made. Our sample here is wrapped in a real wood walnut veneer with a black aluminum front. However, you can also spec it out in black or white. And it features the Purify Ushindi driver, which is a very, very unique 6.5-inch woofer. Now, what makes this driver so unique is the design of its surround. It has asymmetrical ridges that help to reduce distortion. And it's complemented by an AMT tweeter, which rests behind a horn-shaped waveguide. Combine these two drivers with the speaker's dual 6.5-inch Ushindi passive radiators, and you get a reported frequency response of 35 Hz to 20 kHz. Now, impedance is rated at 4 ohms and sensitivity is 85 dB. But back to my initial impressions, a lot of times I'll throw whatever power source we happen to have connected on a product that's just arrived. Sometimes this is great for first impressions, and other times, not so much. In the Radiant's case, the Macintosh MC312 amplifier got first dibs. To say that the Clarity's power needs were being met was a little like saying water is wet. The pairing was a match made in hi-fi heaven, and keeping it real, I didn't think twice about the Radiant's real-world demands.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
Well, then the 90s showed up, and we all know how that went. And once that review was wrapped, I grabbed the Radiants, and I started with the Audiolab 7000A, which packs 70 watts per channel of Class AB power. I gotta tell you, the Audiolab didn't even make it through an entire song before I knew, nope, this ain't gonna work. It's not enough power. So next, I grabbed the 2000A from Yamaha, which is an amp that, frankly, I have never really had to think about. I mean, it's always been a good match, and just let me say that the results still weren't great. And I started to wonder if I had imagined, all of these initial good times. In fact, Christy pointedly reminded me that on at least one occasion, I said that the Radiants were some of the best speakers that I've heard. Thankfully, and after sitting in a local logistics warehouse for months, the Hi-Fi Rose RA280 arrived and saved the day. The Rose is a Class AD amp with 250 watts per channel. Next to the MC312, the Rose brought me back to my pre-Bang & Olufsen experience, and what a relief. I cannot stress how soft and underwhelming these speakers can sound when they don't have the right amount of power. So hopefully, this saves you from playing amplifier roulette like I did. I gotta say, anything under 100 watts isn't even worth considering, and make sure you look for an amp that's stable into 4 ohms and below, and even then it's possible that your mileage is gonna vary. Since we're already pretty deep into the nitty-gritty, let's just keep the party going and jump into setup. Radiant recommends placing the 6.2s anywhere from at least 12 inches or about 31 centimeters to around 2 feet or 61 centimeters from any room boundaries. They're also very clear about placing the speakers at the right height, with the tweeters resting at your seated ear height for absolute best results. In our room, the 6.2s sounded best placed 18 inches off our front wall with 4 feet between them and our side walls. And that created an equilateral triangle with our primary listening position roughly 10.5 feet away. And in this position, the Radiant's in-room measurements were objectively impressive. From about 200 hertz, which could be considered the, low mid-range, on up to 5 or 6 kilohertz, the 6.2 is incredibly linear or neutral. Bass, we're talking below 200 hertz, extends down to the mid-30 hertz region, but even with some boost from the room, it's not what I would classify as a bass-heavy or bass-rich loudspeaker. Ignoring the hit around 50 hertz, we can see that from 30 to 200 hertz, the speaker's bass response tracks in relative alignment with the mid-range, which explains how one might hear bass notes but not always feel them. Then there is the bump in the extreme treble starting at 10 kilohertz, which I have to assume is there to add that little hit of brilliance or contrast to recordings, something we've seen from other speakers like Yamaha's NS800A. Aptly named, the clarity of this speaker is impressive, especially when listening to acoustic piano or more jazzy vocal recordings like Dominic Fee's Ami, which is the type of music I queued up during my initial listening tests. When you power these speakers correctly and have the freedom to turn things up a bit, these speakers really shine when using this kind of music. But admittedly, it's difficult for darn near any speaker to not sound good, if not great, playing back music like this. And maybe tracks like this aren't the best way to determine a loudspeaker's true colors, because as soon as I fed the Radiance anything more complicated or that taxed the speaker's low or top-end performance, my feelings towards this speaker, they kind of changed. Let's start with the bass. As I alluded to early in the review, it's not as if the speaker can't play the low notes. What it doesn't do, however, is hit them with a great deal of weight. Using the double bass throughout Fool Out of You, or the bass line throughout Still Learning, and even We Can't Be Friends, the bass was audible but two-dimensional. What was missing was the physical scale or weight from the bass unless I turned the volume up. With an average in-room volume hovering around 80 dB, with peaks hitting 90 dB plus, the speaker definitely grows in scale and it brings a sense of heft to its performance. The good news is the Radiant can play loud without distortion or strain if your amplifier can get them to the volume needed to unlock their potential, which, for me, easily exceeded my everyday listening levels. But without that boost in volume, the low bass and even low mid-range on this speaker just didn't quite hit hard enough for me and even felt a little weak. Now, the mid-range is this speaker's bread and butter, and with most music, it is very clear and articulate. With well-recorded tracks, it's exceptional. That said, I would not be surprised if some of you sense a lack of body and physicality when listening at volumes below 80 dB in room. I know I did. At more elevated volumes and when doing appointment listening, I really enjoyed the Radiance detail. When I wasn't able to turn up the volume, artists, especially female vocalists known for their more soulful timbre, they just lacked a little body. But anytime I could give this speaker the full Carl, like with the bass, the mid-range sounded so good. It was clean and clear, but if you aren't living in a situation where you can give this speaker the beans, you may actually find better results elsewhere. This brings me to the treble and the AMT style tweeter. It is very well behaved and free of distortion, though, yeah, you guessed it. You need to turn up the volume to hear its overall clarity and extension. At lower volumes, think anything below 70 dB. There wasn't a whole lot of meat on the bones, and the shimmer of cymbals or even the inflection of certain lyrics, they left a lot to be desired, resulting in a sound that comes off as maybe a little bit more subdued than even the speaker's measurements are going to indicate. But turn up the volume and this speaker finds a whole other gear, and with it more ambience, air, and detail retrieval without it sounding artificial, which is just a great thing. With some pop tracks like Most Wanted or Still Learning, that treble boost at the extremes though, it could emphasize some sibilance or recording compression. So if hard rock or screeching deathcore sees frequent rotation, you have been warned. Now, this is not the speaker's fault. However, if you have to play the 6.2s louder than the competition to fully appreciate them, you may encounter issues when listening to recordings that, may not fall into that impeccable category. As for soundstage, the 6.2 is strongest when listening at seated ear height. Vertical dispersion is pretty bad, so when seated too low or when listening far off axis, these were not that impressive. When seated in the center, the 6.2 soundstage is wide and has decent depth, but I have heard better at this price and even a little less. The 6.2 has good center imaging when seated in the middle, though if I leaned right or left, even a foot or two, the sound could bunch to the side I was leaning. When seated in the sweet spot, I still could always locate the speakers within their soundstage, and they never fully, completely disappeared the way some monitors like B&W's 805s or even the Monitor Audio Golds can. If you've been paying attention, it should come as no surprise that the speaker's dynamics require a fair amount of effort on behalf of your amplifier or integrated to reach their full potential. Even when powered correctly, it is my opinion that you still need to turn these speakers up in order to appreciate their lack of distortion and just ultimate resolution and dynamic prowess, which, when you get it right, can be really good. Beyond a capable amplifier and a readiness to listen at full tilt, I also think a capable subwoofer is non-negotiable. When crossed over with the SVS SB17, these were far easier to drive, and their dynamic contrast improved dramatically. With a sub, the speaker goes from being ruler flat and maybe to some even a little dull to very, very special. And while this is a welcome discovery, know that you need to pair it with an equally resolute and articulate subwoofer, which can be more expensive than just any old sub built for brute force. The SB17 was an excellent match, but I also understand it raises the Radiant's overall asking price by more than half. Not to mention, it requires you to have the space to accommodate the subwoofer's girth. I suppose you could also look at subwoofers from JL Audio or REL. Just know that for absolute best results, finding the way to take some of the Clarity's burden off of your amplifier and augment its bottom end is going to pay huge dividends. At just under $4,500 for the pair, the Radiant enters the market among some pretty stiff competition. To me, they're very similar to KEF's R3 Meta, similar in that both are impressively neutral and more or less agreeable to a wide variety of music when it comes to their mid-range, but the Radiants have just a little bit more emphasis at the top end, which might make them feel more intelligible to some of you. Now, in my opinion, both speakers are helped by the presence of a subwoofer, and both take on new life when they can be played at louder volumes. So, knowing that these two speakers share some similar tendencies at times and are likely to appeal more, to that measurements first type audiophile, if your budget is tight, you will probably save by going with the KEF, which is going to allow you to potentially put some of that savings towards a better amp or a capable sub. At just over $4,000 for the pair, the Monitor Audio Gold 100 gets my vote over the Clarity 6.2. The Gold sounds more tower-like and even full range. They have more oomph down low, an equally neutral mid-range, and a treble that is extended as the Clarity, but without that hit of energy that can cause some lesser recordings to become too sibilant at higher volumes. But more importantly, the 100 is just more straightforward to drive, allowing it to be played at more everyday volumes, enabling you to bask in its wide open soundstage without, pissing off your neighbors. And on the complete opposite end of the financial spectrum, we have the ELAC Debut 3.0. This is a budget-friendly speaker and one that is not built to the same high standards as the Radiant and is not capable of playing as loud without strain or distortion. However, for most folks not looking to push that volume envelope, the ELAC is a great option. It's easier to live with, and while it does like a good amp too, you can get by with something that costs less than a HIFI Rose or even an Audiolab 7000A, which just adds to the speaker's value. Just know that like with the Radiants, for maximum impact, the ELACs do benefit from a sub. The Clarity 6.2 by Radiant Acoustics is a solid speaker in more ways than one. I believe they were definitely the right speaker to follow the B&O review. When powered correctly and given the room to breathe, they are impressive, but they're also a touch finicky. This type of speaker will be great for die-hard audiophiles, but the competition is fierce. The $3,000 to $5,000 speaker market is jam-packed with great options that don't come with as much fine print. For those with the time and the funds to improve upon their investment, I would definitely put the Radiants on your list. So that's it. That's my review of Radiant Acoustics Clarity 6.2. If you have any questions or if I missed a comparison, be sure to let us know down in the comments, because we'll see you on Friday's Unplugged with answers to those. And until next time, remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.